And by the way, I have another director sitting right there, and Mr. Reynolds from Carlsbad. So I appreciate all your time, all your support. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Philip's so tall, I can't even quite see his head. I do agree with John. It's pretty difficult to give a speech after the lunch. So I thought I will present my presentation in Chinese. and let you either maintain total awake or maybe fall into sleep quicker. Anyway, I'm really honored to be here. And it's nice to come from Orange County, California, to come to this beautiful wide open space. And the people are super, super nice. I really appreciate it. Boy. Okay. If you look at my presentation title, I'd like to use this opportunity to introduce to you the technology we got involved, which split the CO2 into graphite and oxygen. And we believe this one may play some promising role in our fight against the climate change or global warming. Maybe people would ask, why do we need to deal with CO2? Can we just live in a life without CO2? I would say, yes, it is possible if we all agree to go back to the Stone Age. And then we won't have any luxury we have right now. It would take me 2 months to walk back to California. And I would say, no, I don't want it because I enjoy the comfort we have. But as a result, we really do have CO2 issues. Now, up to today, many sections before me, you have heard so many presentations about how CO2 was produced, or CO2 is produced, then try to capture it, then put it into what we call CCS, carbon capture and also storage, or CSS. Let me see. I think it's well known in the last century, a lot of people make a lot of money and serve humanity tremendously by inventing computers, writing a lot of programs, and make our life really easy, and we could do a lot of things much quicker, cheaper. And the same saying is applied to where we are today. A lot of people are saying in this century, everything is going to be circle around the carbon. Carbon is the source of our energy. And once you burn it, that carbon mixed with oxygen becoming CO2. And the bonding is so strong, it's really difficult to get out. And so burning the fossil fuels will stay with us for at least for foreseeable future, maybe a couple more decades. And a lot of experts suggesting or even proposing we have to reduce the current CO2 reductions, CO2 emissions by about 50% in order to slow down or stabilize the so-called climate change. However, in this country, Congress is debating right now about how to regulate the CO2. Nobody knows what the final legislation is going to be, but we all anticipate it's going to affect us one way or the other. Either if you're the business owner, you will be financially, operationally impacted. If you are the typical housewife or just a simple, sorry individual family, you are, one way or the other, we're going to contribute to this fight. So it is a big challenge to us, and the CO2 emission reduction therefore becoming a huge business. And I believe that's why we're all here. We'd like to be part of this invention, part of this exciting moment, and also part of this opportunity. And the next slide, this is published by EPRI, Electrical Power Research Institute, a well-respected trade association. This study was done last year, and it estimated the CO2 regulation will impose about $1 trillion cost to the US economy over, say, 30 years' time. And it suggests we as a society, we as a nation, we need to spend about $30 billion try to find technologies to reduce the CO2. And this figure actually is much less than what President Obama has proposed. If we study his 10 years budget, he proposed from 2012 to 2019, he would like to collect, I don't mean him, but the government would like to collect $646 billion from the so-called CO2 regulations. So roughly it's about $80 billion a year. And that put us into the right perspective about how big this market is going to be. Now, earlier today, there are certain couple of speakers mentioned about this slide. Again, this is done by April again. It look at from the, really, I got to point out this one. If you really look at the huge table, and that gray area is the so-called CO2 emission. Then it suggests now starting from 2008 or 2010, it projects various different type of technologies going to come into tuition. So it takes a village to do the job. And in the CO2 reduction, it takes a suite of the technologies to reduce the CO2. However, even if you really look at the right-hand side, the end of that chart, which is on 2030, that bottom gray area is still quite substantial. That means even if we put so much money, so much brain trust, brain power into this, reducing the CO2 emissions, we still have a substantial CO2. So CCS has been recognized and proposed by the industrialized countries, G7, G8, as the best key solution or best available technologies to control the CO2 emissions. If we want to reduce the CO2 concentration in the ambient air to stabilize the climate change, we need to reduce by 50%, and the CCS is one of the so-called front runner right now. Has a lot of potential. However, it also has a lot of unresolved technical, political, and also business issues. Because earlier, one speaker mentioned environmentally, we want to do a 1,000-year study. How do you do a 1,000 years study? Try to see the entire life cycle of this proposed technology. And also, how all different interest parties, how to settle, protect their interest. In the meantime, also offer the Joe Six-Pack a fair, cost-effective, energy-efficient solutions. And the CCS, in essence, is now you burn different type of fuels, and you produce CO2. Its concentration changes from a few percentage to about maybe even low 20%. Then we need to condense it, concentrate it, and then liquefy it, then pipe through an elaborate so-called network of the pipelines. And it takes a lot of not only technical know-how, but also tremendous social so-called readjustment. And also quite a few so-called details we have not even worked it out yet. So because of all this, it makes a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of research institutions are becoming much more in a much more excited stage, because we are forced to find a solution to reduce the CO2. And as I mentioned earlier, why you can just split the CO2. Maybe I jump to the next slide here. CO2 is not carbon dioxide. That means one carbon with two oxygens. And they are linked by what we call double bond. And this double bond is one of the strongest in the mother nature. If you want to physically, by using energy to split it, it would take more energy because it takes energy to split that double bond. It may take you 3 parts of the energy to split one CO2. No. The energy is going to produce 3 CO2 for you to split one CO2. So we call carbon negative. You just can't do it straight face. So going back here, the reason reducing CO2 in the ambient air is difficult because we want to have a modern day luxuries, so we continue to have unlimited energy sources. Whenever we need it, we want that to be ready for us. And fossil fuel is going to be here, as I mentioned, for at least now foreseeable future. And the bond energy is really difficult to break. And the third one is now, right now, not too many people have focused on this area. And most of the study focus on the capture, sequestration, or so-called storage. And to do the RD&D, research, development, and also demonstration, three different stages. April suggests now we may need to spend up to even more than 30 billion. And for anyone to come up with any technology, even just on this panel alone, now Raytheon and also now Ford, they're all spending a lot of money. And also Center of Excellence for the Hazardous Waste Management, the same. Now we all spend a lot of money. But converting CO2 to a graphite and oxygen purely almost by chance, but also with a lot of luck, but also took a lot of effort. And my company has been pretty fortunate. We partner with a Japanese entity. Actually, this technology is a Japanese technology, but registered in the US, so you could claim it is our technology. Yeah. And what it does is now, it takes less than 1/3 of the bond energy. And we could split the CO2 to graphite and also to oxygen. And because this technology has gone through its own R&D, we are in the stage ready to go for a so-called field demonstration. And this technology also is capable, is also a so-called carbon positive technology. The technology itself, actually the one I've been working with, we have 3 different, we call systems. System 1, now let me talk about system 3 first. Now that's the one I have been talking about, CO2 split to graphite and oxygen on the second point. System 1, because our CO2 bond energy is higher than NOx and the SOx, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and also other than methane, the other so-called well-known greenhouse gas. So when a power plant, when it burns coal or crude oil or natural gas, they have different type of, we call air pollutants in the flue gas. And we generate the exhaust gas from the diesel engine, and we found CO, CO2, SOx, NOx, and also a couple other particulates. And when we send that exhaust gas through the system, we were able to simultaneously reduce SOx, NOx, CO2. Okay. And this one has some future applications in the new power plant productions. And the system 4 is the one you could just turn it on, just like you put it in your backyard, turn it on and it sucks ambient air. Typically, it depends on where you are. It ranges now, CO2 concentration ranges from, say, 380 to about maybe 390, some ppm, parts per million. And the system we have tested, able to just suck the ambient air, go through the system, coming out roughly at about 300 ppm. Yeah. The next table, so I got all these numbers. I have been going to Japan for almost 2 years now, and we have filed the patent application. That's why I'm allowed to even tell you what we are doing. If you ask me, say 9 months ago, we were not, no, 1 year ago, I would not even tell you what I'm doing because it's just too secretive. Okay. And anyway, what my team had done is we used the actual, we call empirical data, and we calculate, look at the further left column, different energy type or fuel type. We try natural gas, and all these numbers are coming from the well-known databases. The second column from the left is CO2 emitted. If you burn, let me use natural gas as one example. For me to generate the energy to reduce 1 ton of CO2, which is on third column from left, it would generate 0.26 tons of CO2. Using the system 3, which I described, system 3 could remove 3.8. No, system 3 could remove 1 ton of CO2, right? So it's 1 to 0.26 ratio. So roughly you're talking about 3.8 to 1. And I call it as a so-called carbon positive index. That's an indication of your process, your technology is also called carbon positive. And when you go down through the line, if you go down to the fourth one, this data has 2 asterisks, which is coming from EIA, which is part of the DOE is now so-called under the DOE. And if you take the March average BTU content of the coal, which is we only use about 22.2 million BTU, based on the databases or emission factor produced generated by the EIA, to remove 1 ton of CO2 using system 3, it would require that type of coal to emit about 0.52 tons of CO2. And the carbon positive index is 1.921. This purely is not empirical data, it's really based on the hypothetical, theoretical calculations. And that's why we want to do the field demonstration. We want to know, is that precisely, are we so lucky we could truly use this technology and make almost, in a way, count it, not fully resurrect, but maybe make originally perceived as a dirty fuel into a much more acceptable one. Okay? And so that's something we are trying to do. And if this is even successful, we may even go into apply some of the X Prize. There's an X Prize Foundation, or they have an open competition. And I think we might even submit some application to that. So let me go into a little bit more detail on the application one. Okay. Yeah. Application number one is convert CO2 to graphite. And this system has been running for about 2 years, pretty stable, consistent. And we have seen the results. And also the end product, the graphite, can be used in a lot of different areas. Solar panels, and also electric cars, semiconductors, and also batteries. Oxygen can be redirected to boost the boilers, combustion efficiencies. On the application number 2, it can be simultaneously reduce SOx, NOx, and the CO2 concentrations. So right now, you need 2 separate treatments for SOx and 1 for NOx, then upcoming CO2. So you need to treat it 3 times. This technology has a potential to treat all those 3 together. And So if we treat it together, we believe now there's a potential to reduce the construction cost of the brand new power plant by about 10%, which could be pretty substantial. The potential customer for this now technology, obviously, is now the major power generation process, all the power plants. And also, the next one is all the new power plant constructions. The third one is now CCS site. CCS now, they store a lot of almost concentrated CO2. Some of them may want to apply this technology to truly remove the CO2 instead of keep it there for eons, forever. And lastly, now some of the locations or some of the CO2 emitters, they may not be able to get to the CS pipelines. So we could design a portable unit for them to use. And that's pretty much